let's talk about the firearm. It's just an assembly of steel and polymer, right? And yet it's somehow one of the most polarizing artifacts in all of human history. It represents this deep, fundamental conflict in our societies, a conflict that's not really about the tool itself, but about our deepest values. So let's dive right into the heart of this divide. And when you really boil it all down, the entire global debate comes down to this single profound tension. It's a constant tug of war between two things we all deeply value: personal freedom and collective safety. The real question is, how on earth do you strike that balance? To really get a handle on the arguments we're having today, we've got to look back, because the debate over gun regulation, it is as old as the gun itself. This is not a new conversation. It is a centuries-old argument that we've just inherited. This timeline shows such a fascinating evolution in thinking. We start way back in 1517, where the whole point of a gun ban was to preserve the social hierarchy, to keep weapons out of the hands of commoners. Fast forward to 1689 and 1791, and the right to have a gun becomes a civic duty, something tied to serving in a militia to protect the state. But then, bam, 2008. The Heller decision in the US completely flips the script. It formally redefines this as a widespread individual right for self-defense, totally separate from any militia duty. That is a massive, massive historical pivot. So with that history in mind, let's explore the powerful arguments from one side of this divide: the idea that an armed citizenry is ultimately a freer and a safer citizenry. At the very philosophical core of this argument is what's called the insurrectionist theory. The idea is pretty simple. The right to bear arms is the one right that guarantees all your other rights. It's the final fail-safe, the ultimate insurance policy against a government that might one day become tyrannical. And listen, this isn't just some abstract theory from a textbook. We saw a real-world high-stakes example in 2022 when the Ukrainian government literally started handing out thousands of rifles to everyday citizens to resist an invasion. For supporters of gun rights, this was Exhibit A, a crystal-clear demonstration that an armed population can be a critical defense against both foreign aggression and tyranny at home. Now, on a more personal level, there's the very practical argument of the great equalizer. And the logic is simple, right? A firearm can completely erase the physical advantages an attacker might have, whether it's strength, age, or just sheer numbers. It allows someone who is otherwise vulnerable to effectively defend themselves, leveling the playing field in a life-or-death moment. And of course, we absolutely cannot ignore the economics and the culture here. The firearms industry is a massive economic engine, contributing over $91 billion a year in the US alone. But it goes way beyond the numbers. For millions of people, firearms are deeply woven into their cultural heritage, a heritage of hunting, sport, and self-reliance. Okay, now let's shift gears completely and look at the other side of this debate. This perspective reframes the entire issue. It moves the conversation away from rights and focuses squarely on risk, arguing that widespread gun access actually creates a public health crisis. So this argument starts by throwing down a direct challenge to that core self-defense assumption. It asks a really simple but profound question. Does that tool you bought for protection actually end up increasing the danger to the very people it's supposed to protect? And the data from this public health perspective is, well, it's stark. Having a firearm in the home triples the risk of suicide for the people who live there. Just think about that for a second. The weapon brought into the house to protect against an outside threat is statistically far more likely to be used by or on a member of the family. And this chart illustrates exactly why. It's called the instrumentality effect. You see, suicide attempts are very often impulsive, born from a temporary crisis that can pass. With pills, over 90% of people survive. They get a second chance. With a firearm, the survival rate is less than 15%. The sheer lethality of the gun turns a fleeting moment of despair into a permanent, fatal outcome. There's no coming back. Now, just as there's a big economic argument for the gun industry, there is a powerful, frankly staggering one against it. The annual cost of gun violence in the US, what some have called the violence tax, is an unbelievable $557 billion. That covers everything from healthcare to lost wages to the justice system, and it absolutely dwarfs the industry's economic contribution. So, we have two incredibly powerful but completely competing arguments. How does this trade-off between liberty and safety actually play out in the real world? Well, let's look at a few different countries as laboratories and see what choices they've made. Here you can see three very distinct choices. You've got the United States, with more guns than people, prioritizing that broad individual right, and it has the highest firearm homicide rate among its peers.
Then you have Japan, with a near total ban on civilian guns, and they have fewer than 10 gun deaths a year. And then there's Australia. After a terrible massacre in 1996, they took a middle path, banning semi-automatic weapons. The result? Mass shootings effectively stopped for over 2 decades. The data here suggests a very direct link between policy choices and public safety outcomes.
But this debate is so far from being over. In fact, there's emerging technology that is threatening to make many of our current laws and even our arguments completely obsolete.
So, meet the ghost gun. You download the files online. You print the key parts on a cheap, consumer-grade 3D printer. You combine them with a few easily sourced metal components, and that's it. You've created an untraceable, unserialized firearm in your own home. This completely bypasses every regulation we have: background checks, serial numbers, the whole shebang. It's what people are calling the democratization of lethality, and it's a regulatory nightmare. How do you control guns when they start as nothing more than digital information?
So in the end, there really is no easy solution. This isn't a simple problem. It's a fundamental choice about the kind of social contract we all want to live under. Do we choose a society where citizens are the first line of defense, where they bear both the incredible power and the immense responsibility of the gun? Or do we choose a society where the state holds a monopoly on force, promising to keep us all safe in exchange for our disarmament? This is the unresolved question at the very heart of the debate, and it's one every society has to keep answering for itself over and over again.
Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment with any topic you'd like us to talk about in future videos, and don't forget to hit the like button.